Welcome back to Inside Criminal Minds, a series dedicated to analyzing an elite FBI team. If you are new to the series, there is a link in the description down below to catch you up. This episode begins with the DEA raiding a meth den, and I think it's due to Breaking Bad, but shouldn't the DEA be wearing respirators just in case they're in the middle of a cook? In retrospect, it doesn't matter because they stumbled onto a terrorist cell. Then Hotch is awakened by a phone call which concerns Haley due to the talk of a terror alert, and also sets up Hotch's turmoil in this episode. Jack is having his pictures taken, but Hotch doesn't know whether he'll be able to make it, but also doesn't want to stop Haley, and she agrees. At the FBI HQ, the team arrive to discuss the terrorist group, and everyone gets to meet Prentice, who shows off her abilities by beginning to speak Arabic, which proves to be extremely valuable, especially in this episode. They also figure out that the mastermind was using a Nextel, which leads them to Jind Allah, who just so happens to be in
Montego Bay, where they keep all the Al Qaeda.
Well, it's actually Guantanamo Bay, and Prentice explains his motives, and JJ reveals Jin's job in the Muslim faith. Afterwards, the team split up, and Hotch suggests Gideon bring Prentice to Guantanamo due to her Arabic background, and Gideon pushed back slightly, but he begrudgingly brings her along. Also, Prentice uses or overuses the term
Sir?
showing how much she respects Gideon. However, she tries to thank Gideon for his decision, but gets cut off almost immediately because Gideon assures her she's here to do a job, showing how Gideon sees Prentice as a member of the team. Reed attempts to get information from Gideon, and after Prentice calls out Gideon, he uses this as a teaching moment by utilizing chess to explain profiling. Also delegates Reed and Prentice on how they should divide the profiling responsibility. And then after the chessboard flies, Prentice shows how smart she is by bringing up the fact that Gideon would have won by 3 moves. At the terrorist cell safe house, Hotch and Morgan meet up with the main DEA agent, Bonnie Ryan, and Morgan is able to explain the dispersal device, which is very interesting because it's similar to a bomb, and in Empty Planet, we learn that he was part of a bomb squad. But this concludes this cell is relatively small. Back at Gitmo, we are shown Jind and how he's being treated when the supervisor meets with our team, and Prentice picks up the fact Jin is reciting the Quran from memory, meaning he's probably Hafiz. They also find out the guys have been torturing Jin in order to get any information from him, and Gideon decides to use this as an advantage by humanizing Jin, stopping the torture to speed up the time frame of interrogation. Not only does he stop the torture, he also brings a fresh change of clothes in an attempt to gain favor from Jin, and this works pretty well. Meanwhile, Morgan finds chemicals that are linked to the weaponization of anthrax. Also, Gideon does a good job at putting Jin at ease. Reed explains that they wouldn't need much anthrax to be effective when Prentice figures out Jind is Egyptian, and when Gideon reveals this to Jind, he is impressed due to the fact that the CIA has been interrogating them for months to no avail, and in less than a day, Gideon knows more than them. And at the end of this exchange, Gideon again shows empathy by allowing Jind to pray and also correctly orientating him towards Mecca, which is another way for Gideon to earn Jin's trust. Back at Quantico, Garcia and JJ comb through all of the traffic in order to get a leg up on this group, and JJ shows her profiling skills by directing Garcia on what words to search for. And using this, they were able to find a location, and they inform Hotch on where to go next. While Gideon continues his interrogation with Jin, It is also interesting that Jin first allows Gideon to drink, showing even the least amount of compassion to Gideon, the same compassion that Gideon has been showing Jin this entire time. This is when Jin gets into talking about the Quran, and more importantly, the verse of the sword. And Gideon explains not only his religion, but also Jin's, and has an astute point.
1 billion Muslims manage to practice their faith in peace. For Allah is surely merciful.
Which prompts Jin to explain why he joined the Muslim faith. Unfortunately, his family was killed by a bombing when he was very young. This is when Reed calls Garcia in order to confirm Jin's story. Next, the DEA, along with Hotch and Morgan, begin the infiltration while wearing their respirators. See, they had them the whole time. Also, when they enter, Agent Ryan flags Morgan with her gun a few times. Also, it looks like she didn't quite know what to do, but they don't find anything that links the group to the location, meaning Gideon needs to get the intel by talking directly to the source. This is when Gideon reveals they found the other cell's house, and Reed picks up on how calm Jin gets. And this is a tell that the new house,
it's a trap!
And then the house blows up. When Garcia and JJ are discussing the anthrax, JJ notices that there was an explosion in the news at the same location that Morgan and Hotch were. So Garcia calls them, and luckily Hotch and Morgan are fine, but they did lose a SWAT officer. They begin to debrief, and now all I'm wondering is why the DEA is helping find a terrorist cell. It would just make more sense for the FBI to work directly with the CIA or some other group to handle this, but I digress. Gideon relieves Reed and Prentice from the notion that one of their team members passed away by explaining about the one SWAT officer. And Gideon immediately questions Jin due to the new developments, and Jin revealed that his son was attacked, not his family. This prompts Reed to call Garcia, and they were able to find out Jindalaw's actual name by confirming the other story. Then Gideon leaves Jin with his prayers and even asks to speak again. This shows how Gideon's compassion helps him figure out how to crack this unsub. But also, when they figure out Jin's actual name, they realize Jin was recruiting people in prison, and we get the closest thing to a profile in this episode, where Reed explains the MIS movement and how they recruit less desirable inmates. Then Gideon attempts to get the CIA's help in one of the craziest way possible.
On FBI, CIA, right now we have the ability to break through all the protocol and share information.
And this was able to convince them to share what they know now that they know his real name. And at the FBI HQ, Garcia is able to comb through the CIA's intel. Gideon, meanwhile, is talking with Jin, and Jin's appreciative of Gideon to allow him to pray regularly. Also, that Gideon sees Jin as a human as opposed to his other captors who treat him as a vermin. But after this exchange, Gideon leaves to allow Jin to pray. When Garcia finds the missing anthrax from a lab, meanwhile, Prentice and Reed discuss Gideon's method, and Reed does stick up for Gideon.
I've been with him long enough to trust him.
I love how much Reed trusts Gideon, especially since Gideon is his mentor. But this is when Garcia finds the guy who stole the anthrax and where he lives. This is when Morgan and Hotch schedule a breach to find several members dead with a lab, and they realize that the cell is on their way to the target. And with no more leads, Gideon decides to show a little bit more of his hand by bringing in Reed to reveal that he was outside taking notes to try to understand him, and Gideon gets a call on his radio about an attack, and they show gruesome news footage which gets Jin to talk more and more until he accidentally reveals the target. And this was all planned by Gideon in order to push out as much information as possible from Jin, which was very clever, by the way. This is when Jin realizes the attack hasn't happened yet. And this scene definitely got me the first watch because Gideon is such an amazing actor. You really believe that the attack went through up until the fact that they turn on all the lights and pretty much pull the rug under Jin. Then, as Hotch and Morgan drive to the target, Hotch wrestles with the knowledge for personal gain because the mall that's the target is also the one that Haley is taking Jack in order to get his pictures. See, it all came back. And this is a very interesting dilemma because Hotch is very much, at least into this point, cognizant of the rules and regulations of the FBI and tries to follow the straight and narrow no matter what. But this really shows his first chink in his armor for that because Morgan convinces him to call. Now, technically, he did not break any security protocol because, unfortunately, Haley didn't pick up. But it does show that side of Hotch that will get more developed as the series goes on. The fact that he's able to skirt the rules. And this is a good scene for Morgan as well, showing how much that he really cares about Hotch and his family by convincing him to break protocol in order to save them. Really shows the relationship between Morgan and Hotch in a way that we've previously never seen before. But at the mall, Hotch goes to the cameras while Morgan and the DEA track down the cell's vehicle and wait until they know more about the location. Hotch finds a group of men on top of the roof near the air vents, and with everyone wearing their masks, they approach the cell, staging the event when they have a shootout on top of the roof, and one guy ends up falling through the skylight. And after everything that happened, Hotch gets home, and Haley reveals that it was probably a good idea that she didn't get photos because of the quote-unquote break-in at the mall. But this relieves Hotch of a little bit of his stress from earlier that they were completely out of harm's way. And it's all because Haley didn't want Hotch to miss this, which is very sweet. Finally, Prentice and Gideon debrief on the plane, and Gideon reveals that he knew he needed to trick Jin in order to get what he needed the very first meeting, showing just how smart Gideon is as a character, being so far ahead of even his colleagues that he's with. And he needed a way to push time forward by ingeniously using Jin's prayers. Then Gideon defeats Reed in chess, and
I quit. Yield, surrender.
which allows Gideon to offer basically an olive branch to Prentice to play chess with him, ending the episode. This episode was a good introduction to Prentice. It showed a lot of her strengths and being able to speak a foreign language. Also the fact that she's smarter than Reed in chess, which is very interesting because of his eidetic memory. This was also a good episode for Hotch. It shows that no matter what the protocol is, he's probably going to start caring more about his family. And the fact that he breaks the rules for Haley and Jack really shows how his motivations have changed since the beginning of the series, and that he's not always going to be the G-man that he portrays, which gives some much needed depth. Also, we get some camaraderie with Morgan and Hotch, which I touched on earlier, but it really shows you how much Morgan cares for his team. Also, it made sense that they left the media liaison at HQ because they weren't trying to cause a panic by the media scares. And unfortunately, Reed just shows how bad he is at chess. He does help with Jin, but that's it. It was a fine episode, a little slow, and when I rewatch the series, it's one that I almost think about skipping because in the next episode, Reed's psyche is pushed to a limit, almost to breaking point. Thank you for for watching. If you are curious on what happens when a spy gets fired, check out Burned Notice, my other series. Link in the description. And as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.